were in crisis. 1966. Shout out to my dad who's here. I know about this topic because as is true with all Victor presentations, I'm going to promise you I'm not an expert in this. Correct me and ask me questions, contribute, feel free to contribute at any point. But if you're going to do so nicely. And I'm not trying to persuade you of anything. What I'm about to talk about is a very complicated question. I don't presume to get it all right. I almost guarantee that there will be stuff I get wrong, 100%. So, yeah. If you know better than me about something, just change it. The last thing, this is specific to this event, because of the interesting times we're in right now, I don't want you to conclude at all that I think I have any of the answers to what I'm about to talk about, because I don't. I will just put that out there. I very much do not have the answers, but I think it's worth asking some of these questions to understand the past of this place, to sort of understand better the current and the future of this place. Okay, done with the disclaimers. Who's that and what's that? Anybody know? No idea? Those pixels don't say anything to you? Okay. That guy, his name is Yusuf, and that building is a place he used to work. Okay? Who's heard the words intrabank before? Yeah, nice. Only a few more people. Okay, great. So today's story is about intrabank. The story of intrabank's rise, collapse, and how you can find out more. All right, to understand this story, we're going to go through it very, very quickly. We got to understand the Lebanese banking situation in the 1940s, the banking sector in the 1940s, the 50s, who was Yusuf Beidas, and the rise of intra, the demise of intra, and where you can find out more. Success? Awesome. Okay, Lebanese banking in the 1940s and 50s. Right, like we think, who lives here right now? Okay. Prior to 6 months ago, we used to think, I would imagine, the Lebanese banking sector is the solid, like sort of a foundation of Lebanon, right? Not always, and not now either. Okay, so let's talk about the Lebanese banking sector in general, right? It is a key component of the economy post-independence, not pre-independence, post-independence. Lebanon was basically focused on financial and trade services to other Middle Eastern countries at the expense of, this is important for the second presentation, at the expense of domestic sort of industry productive sectors of the economy. Pre-independence, this was not true. The number of banks that started after World War II, went from 9 in 1945 to 90 in 1966, primarily locally held. Okay? Funds were mostly flight capital, which meant capital that was put here, it was traveled here, so to speak, but the owners of that wealth did not live here because it made sense to domicile the wealth here, but not themselves here for banking regulation rules, which I'll get into. And petrodollars, this is right after, around the time that tap line was built and a lot of Aramco was established, and there was a lot of petrodollars that was coming through Lebanon. And possibly, and very interestingly, international narcotics trade. Okay. This is total bank deposits from 1939 to 1975. You don't need to know the numbers, but that looks like they went up. This is the number of banks in Lebanon. 1945, it was 9 banks. 1966, it's 93. Okay? Why were banks opening so fast? Any guessers?
Making money.
What?
Because it's making money.
Yeah. Specifically, it was interesting to open banks in the 1940s and 1950s because, first of all, it was very easy to open and to govern a bank here. The governance rules were very, very lax. Very little requirements. In the 1940s, the central bank, which I'll get into in a second, the current central bank did not exist. And the only real act of financial legislation that was passed was the Banking Secrecy Act in 1956 that really established Lebanon as a Switzerland of the Middle East, right? Who's heard the term Switzerland of the Middle East, right? Everyone. Who's heard the term Paris of the Middle East, right? These seem interchangeable, right? They are not. Switzerland of the Middle East means a very specific thing, and it means a very different thing than Paris of the Middle East. This is how it became Switzerland of the Middle East. Okay. BDL, as we know it now, was not always the central bank. The L part wasn't, right? Beforehand, it used to be called the Bank of Syria and the Lebanon, right? That's how you pronounce it, right? Okay, so it used to be the bank of issue. When we say bank of issue, what that means is that it used to be the bank that issues the notes, right? In our mind now, when we think of the central bank, we usually think of dollars, and like they don't issue dollars, so we don't think of the central bank as really like a quote-unquote bank of issue. But at the time, this was the bank of issue. It wasn't a dual currency economy. And because it wasn't, you guys can come inside. Because it wasn't an independent state, this was a concession. This bank won that contract from, at the time, the French. And they won it in 24, they won it in 37, and their contract was coming up. And in 1961, there were all these powerful factions locally and abroad who were trying to lobby for that right. Eventually, in 1964, I'm kind of skipping ahead of 1964, BDL was started, and essentially was this brand new organization that had a very newbie staff that did not know exactly how to maintain this robust financial sector, and it was quite married to this idea of laissez-faire regulations equals success, economic success here. Okay. For more information about this, if anybody wants to nerd out about this, look into the law of money and credit that was passed in August of 1963. If you're like a finance nerd, that's worth looking into. And that's a good point. There's a really, really, really good documentary on the central bank. If you're ever bored on an MEA flight, under documentaries, the section you never go into, there's a really, really good documentary about BDL and one about MEA, which come into play in this presentation. Okay, all right. Who was this guy? Let's talk about him. This guy was born in 1912 in Jerusalem, son to a Christian Palestinian father named Khalil Beidas, who is amazing. I almost like switch topics because he's amazing. He's a scholar and ran this amazing newspaper. You should look into him if you're curious. And a Lebanese mother. I'm going to skip through a lot of stuff, but he started his career working at Barclays in Palestine as a trader, and then was this sort of financial whiz kid, super, super smart, rose the ranks, eventually became the GM of that branch. In 1948, he fled to Lebanon with his then pregnant wife, and became a trader at the Beirut port. Very, very, very quickly made tons and tons of money, and eventually with his old clients from Palestine, along with the partners, I think it's the brother of his wife and a couple other partners, establishes what is then called International Trading Bank to serve his old clients and current partners. Let me see if I can read this properly. Okay, so on occasion, there's a lot of lore about this guy. There's a lot of lore. He's very stylish and arrogant and funny and charismatic and very, very smart. They say that like he rented all his office furniture at one point so to increase his sales. With the cunning, this is from a New York Times article. With the cunning of a Byzantine rug merchant, he took cut from every coin that crossed his palm, and in another notable, where is this? Where am I trying to read? I'm trying to read something.
It's a minuscule transaction demonstrated a particularly imaginative use of capital assets.
Yeah. And then at the beginning, he said, I wanted to read something that was interesting here, but I can't find it. Oh yeah, every penny of profit went into expansion, and in due course he was doing such volume that 100 competing money changers had to go out of business. Like he just understood intuitively finance, not in a quantity kind of way, but in a trader kind of way. Where am I going? Okay, so now that's kind of him. Any questions about him? I'm trying to go through this quickly.
Who was him?
Who was him? Yusuf Beidas.
Oh, that's him.
That's him. That was an easy question. Any harder questions? company. Okay, so he started Intra in 1951 with a capital of around $2 million. Much like him, there's a lot of conflicting figures. So when I say numbers, I will say like a little amount because I don't know what it means. But he basically started with a little amount, and over the next 15 years underwent a dramatic expansion to become the largest financial institution in the Middle East. We know bankers, right? Everyone knows these big banker names and families. He was not of that ilk, right? He was a Palestinian former bank trader at Barclays branch, right? Like he was not from a family, an aristocratic family, aristocratic Beirut family that like owned banks historically. So you can sort of foresee the rest of these slides. So between 1953 and 1961, his assets went 20x, from 23 million to 480 million. To get an idea in dollars, just divide by 3. Deposits went from 11 million to 383x. That's a 338 million. That's a 35x within a matter of 8 years. This is ridiculous. Like, this is insane. So why did people give him money? Any guesses?
They trusted him.
He was trying.
Charismatic.
Trusting, charismatic. Who
No.
trusts the banker? Who trusts the banker? Yeah, there we go. We're getting there. All of these are right answers. Okay. In that time, he was this like sexy figure. He was kind of this man of interest, international acclaim. He bought a majority stake of then crumbling MEA and turned it into a very profitable airline. He bought the lucrative Casino du Liban. He bought a port of Beirut. He bought a 27-story skyscraper on Fifth Avenue, Studio Baalbek, all these hotels. He was all over the place. Okay, Intrabank was hugely successful. Okay, do you guys believe me? Am I believable? Yeah, amazing. Okay, so by 1966, his assets were worth over 190 million. So to do the math, about 60 million, and held 40%. So this number, I hear 40, I hear 60%. There are different estimates of all bank deposits in Lebanon. Suffice it to say, he was easily the biggest bank in the country, all within like a matter of years. This is, I was talking earlier, if you ever want to get a laugh, like read diplomatic, you guys can come in, no? Diplomatic cables about like Arab leaders. They're all so dry, you can come in. So this is from a U.S. Embassy cable that was sent back from, I guess, Beirut back to D.C. Beidas had been the key figure in obtaining these large accounts by his smooth, convincing talk and by the clever manner of inflating the ego of the prospective clients. Beidas' sales talk has apparently been irresistible to the simple sheikhs from the Arab hinterland. Right? Very offensive. Why can't I get this? Okay, but in addition to the, everybody said cool, smooth, all that stuff, but you said interest rates. He was also able to offer incredible interest rates because although he was wearing impressive pinstripe suits, he was also a really, really good banker at the end of the day. And so he engaged in all these like long-term finance deals. He was buying real estate, he was financing construction of other airlines, engaged in all this these kind of shady stuff at the time, but had huge returns. So, you know, looks good on his packaging, underneath really, really good still, so people give him money. Okay, now let's get to the demise. I'm going quick. Okay, so basically the story here is that he was too good too fast, and there are a lot of things happening at the same time. This is where the story, everything until now is pretty much fact. I'm pretty sure about everything until now. Now is where the story gets interesting and where it gets complicated. Okay.
So his parents get murdered in an alleyway and he becomes Batman?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so this is where it gets complicated. Okay, so basically, let's start with how are we gonna figure this out? This is gonna be hard to explain. Okay, so there's a lot of different things. Let's talk about local adversaries, global politics, and his own sort of his own. Yeah. Let's start first. This is going to be really hard to explain. Okay, so basically, he was kind of a shady person, and banking was shady as well. But on top of that, because he was so successful and so charismatic, he had a lot of enemies, right? So let's start with 1962, before the demise. This is like the pre-demise. In 1962, one of his business adversaries spreads a story that he sold land in southern Lebanon to Israel, and it became this huge controversy. And he was called into the criminal court, and they almost put him in jail immediately. And his relationship with President Shahab basically helped save him, because he said this is a made up story, and this guy's your business adversary, and he's trying to sabotage you, and so we're going to end this case. But this was a foreshadowing of the things to come. He was also criticized over his support of Fatah and his possible support of the United Arab Republic and Nasser, and Saudi was not into that as well. And there were rumors of their intrabank's lack of liquidity because of, does everybody understand what I say, lack of liquidity? Lack of liquidity because they had invested in real estate. Okay, that's 1962. What happens in 1966? This is where the juicy, amazing, like international conspiracy comes in, which we all love, right? So, inflation, the Fed in the States increases inflation rates. They have been very, very low. They decide to increase inflation rates. Interest rates, not inflation, interest rates. And then all of a sudden, people can find higher interest rates in Europe and the West. And so GCC investors no longer see a good deal in Lebanon. And on October 9, King Faisal of Saudi and some other Saudi investors withdraw a huge sum of money from Intrabank specifically. A brother of Saudi Arabia's King Faisal withdraws $6 million. Suddenly, the genius from Jerusalem was running out of money. Okay? October 9. The timeline's hard. I'm going to try my best to keep it. Okay, this bank, as I said, was especially vulnerable. The whole banking system had liquidity issues because everyone was taking out money. But Intra had a very, very bad liquidity issue because of their focus on real estate. And they had very, very limited reserves. And their business model was to focus on huge high net worth individuals. So a few of those net worth individuals leave, they're screwed. Okay, so at the time of the crisis, he had only less than 7% liquidity ratio. What that means is that for every $1 million of liquidity, every $1 million of assets he had, he only had 70,000 in the bank. Basically, that's what that means. Sound familiar? Okay, so Friday, October 14th, the bank has a huge short-term problem. They go to the BDL to give them a short-term loan to help with to make sure that there's money coming out of the theoretical ATMs. BDL says no. The board of directors decides we're going to close our doors, and they default on their payments and are declared bankrupt. I just want to read. I'm going to explain this part in a second. I want to read this in one second. Okay. Okay, hold on for a second. Where is this? Okay, I'm going to come back to this in 1 second. Okay, so when Intra went and sought to get a line of credit from BDL in the beginning said, you know what, maybe we can help you. And and the way they would help them is they would take shares of some of the companies they own and then trade them for a line of credit, right? Like MEA or something like that. And usually that would be done discreetly so that no one in the market ends up hearing about it, so it doesn't cause a scare and people don't run on the banks. The guy who was deputy head of BDL at the time, who was in charge of this decision, said, okay, he had it out for Intra. A lot of people in the market had it out for him. And so he said, you know what? Deliver the shares, the actual pieces of paper, deliver them in suitcases to the lobby of the central bank, and let us count them in front of everyone to make sure that these exist before we offer you this line of credit. And the line of credit you're giving us 120 million shares. The line of credit I will give you 50 million liras worth. So only 12% of the actual value. And the whole point of this was a big PR stunt to get people talking about how intrabank screwed. So on October 15th, they are declared bankrupt. That sends shockwaves through the system. On October 16th, BDL comes together and says, we won't save Intra, but we will save everyone else because Intra is beyond recovery. And they go bankrupt. And BDL says, we're going to go for a 3-day bank holiday to make sure that there's no run on the bank, to make sure that we can figure this stuff out in those 3 days. Okay. Now this is when it kind of gets complicated. Yes?
Sorry, I don't really get why they wanted Intrabank to fail, why they saved all the other ones.
This is a really good
Because
question.
They were super, like, he had such a big image and they wanted him to be screwed, like just their egos? Or?
Okay, I will present some of the theories. There are a couple theories. There is a global, till his dying day, which was like 2 years later, he went very publicly and said that this was a global conspiracy against me, that I was becoming too strong as a pro-Palestinian banker in the Middle East, and I was becoming too pro-Nasser in a Saudi-led region. I was too what's the word I'm looking for? Too full of myself and too brash for the local Lebanese bankers. I wasn't willing to join the Association of Bankers. I thought I was bigger than the market itself, and I thought I was smarter than everybody. I had tiny liquidity ratios because I thought I'm fine. I'm doing these crazy investments. So the market itself, the local players very much did not like him. The head of the ABL hated him. This vice president of the BDL hated him. His competition obviously hated him. The local industry that he was trying to buy, like the guy who spread the rumor about him with Israeli, whether it's true or not, it hasn't been proven true or false. That guy was the owner of a company that he was trying to buy. Like, that's why I put that Batman thing. Like, you don't get big without people trying to, it's a game. It's a competition. People are trying to screw you. You're trying to screw them. The global thing, the global conspiracy about the Fed hikes was related to regional players and saying this independent bank is getting way too strong. They're taking a cut of all the petrodollars going through. Why do we need to have a regional third party that's taking a cut? Let's get rid of this guy and let's have it be locally owned. Foreign-owned banks. So after 1966, and this is where I'll end it, after the 1966 crisis, they go bankrupt. There's an interesting addendum that I won't go into, how it turns into intrabank investment bank. And I want to say something real quick. When I say they go bankrupt, I'm saying they go bankrupt because of liquidity. Commercial bank, right? They are massively valuable. Their assets outweigh their debts hugely.
You know Monteverdi? Monteverdi area? That's all the mountains owned by Interbank. You know the prison Rumi? From Rumi to the highway, it's all Interbank. The hills of the Casino de Legon, where is the now, or the villas and everything, all Interbank. So he had.
Yeah, very current question. Yeah, so the depositors, the small depositors, from what I have read, were made whole over the course of the next few years through receivership. Receivership is the word I was looking for. So when a company goes into bankruptcy, there is a receivership and there is a receiver who does it. And in this case, it was some task force created by the BDL and the parliament. So the local depositors, the small depositors were made whole. There was something called a buy-in, which we are all talking about now. The large shareholder, the large depositors were made to become shareholders in what was called intra-investment. So there was a firm that I haven't talked about at all called Intra-Investment that was like a spin-off of Intra. That was not a commercial bank, but a investment bank that remained one of the largest banks in the country until the 80s. That's how much assets he had. That even on cruise control throughout the 70s and 80s, it still maintained this huge portfolio. But from what I read, they were made whole. Yeah.
And the ones who got shares in intra-investment, what happened to that company?
That company, it exists, right? Yeah. I mean, they were.
It's owned by the central bank now, right now.
Really? Okay. I didn't know that. Yeah. I don't know 100%, but these were not invaluable shares, right? So these are not invaluable shares. But the ratio of things I know to things I don't know are largely skewed to the things I don't know. So you should check out this stuff. Okay.
If you want to understand the Lebanese current banking sector, follow this and replace the investment of real estate in the investment in the central bank.
Yeah.
So the illiquidity of the banking sector in Lebanon is exactly the way the liquidity of the interbank. So the banks here, they have money, but they have money that is not liquid, but it is in the central bank. He had money that's not liquid, but it's in property. So the same kind of concept. You are talking about the interbank default. That doesn't mean that he should have defaulted, but he wouldn't have defaulted had he had liquidity. And the banking sector right now in Lebanon wouldn't have defaulted had they had liquidity. They have the money in one place that they cannot get hold of. And the whole thing is regarding interest. When he was giving high interest at the low interest environment, it was also like a Ponzi deal, exactly what the central bank and the commercial banks are doing here. So this is like 50 years apart, but it's very, very interesting financial crisis.